So the first thing we're going to get into is your policy and procedure manual. Now, this is for staff. This should be staff directed. This is not for your residents. So your policies and procedures, your manual houses the internal protocols of your recovery residents, ensuring compliance with both the industry standards as well as best practices and legal requirements. Your manual should outline and define the best and most promising practice for your recovery residents with descriptions of how support is provided and business is performed in compliance with the National Alliance of Recovery Residents Standards, Code of Ethics, and industry best practices. So the first thing we're looking at is your mission and vision statements. Your mission statement defines the purpose of your organization and must align with the needs of your priority population. Your vision statement outlines your organization's long-term goals and aspirations. And things to consider is what priority populations are you serving? You want to make sure that your mission and vision statements define that you are treating individuals with substance use disorders, although they may also qualify under other criteria, dual diagnosis, but we do want to touch on substance use disorders since these are recovery residences. Focus on the needs of your individual organization and be aligned with NAR's core principles. What are NAR's core principles? Under administrative and operations, principle A is that you operate with integrity. Principle B is you uphold residents' rights. Principle C, you create a culture of empowerment where residents engage in governance and leadership. Principle D, develop staff abilities to apply the social model of recovery. And in U level 4s, there is going to be a blend of both clinical and social, but we want to see a high emphasis of social model recovery within the actual recovery residences. Domain 2, your physical environment. Principle E, you want to provide a home-like environment to the best of your ability. Principle F, provide a safe and healthy environment. Domain 3 is recovery support with principle G, facilitate active recovery and recovery community engagement. Principle H, model pro-social behaviors and relationship enhancement skills. Principle I, cultivate the resident's sense of belonging and responsibility for your community. And finally, domain 4, being a good neighbor. The principle J, be a good neighbor. Now, we don't expect you to cover every single one of those in a mission and vision statement, but you want to make sure that your mission and vision statements do align with all of those core principles. So the next document we're going to be talking about is your Code of Ethics. Your Code of Ethics outlines the mission and values of your business or organization with how individuals in your organization approach problems based on your core values and principles. So first, we want to make sure that you adhere to the NAR and your FASAR Code of Ethics to ensure ethical behavior and respect for your residents. You want to make sure that all of your employees and volunteers that work in some type of staff role or your peer leaders or house managers review and sign both the NAR and FASAR Code of Ethics and that they're maintained in their employee records. And if applicable, you want to make sure that you provide FASAR your own internal code of ethics if you have one to ensure that it aligns with both the NAR and FASAR Code of Ethics. And then you want to make sure that you maintain those signed Code of Ethics within the employee's file as well. And your policy and procedure would outline all of these things, that they do review and they are informed of the NAR Code of Ethics, the FASAR Code of Ethics, and that they are maintained in the employee records. Moving on to confidentiality. 1, we need to establish policies and procedures to protect the privacy of resident files. You want to train employees regarding client confidentiality and the importance of maintaining privacy, and establish clear practices for communication with external parties, ensuring that confidentiality is maintained. So who has access to resident records? Where are those resident records maintained? When can you acknowledge or speak on resident records with a third-party individual? How can they redact consent, etc.? And then you want to make sure you're also providing training. That is the key. In your policy and procedure for your confidentiality, You want to make sure you outline the maintenance, privacy, and storage of resident files. You provide the training for your employees and volunteers. You outline how your recovery residence ensures that new residents have a clear understanding of the need for confidentiality within the community. So a peer-to-peer anonymity policy. You want to make sure that residents are aware of that as well. A clear practice that addresses how communication is established regarding residents with third parties, which may include reciprocal releases with care providers, ROIs, business associate agreements that are completed by and with permission of the resident. And would also include notification of involuntary discharge and or reoccurrence of use to the emergency contact referring treatment providers, probation, parole officers, case management, etc. So in the event of an emergency, residents need to be made aware that even if they try to redact consent, that you are going to notify emergency contacts and any service providers the resident is dealing with, and probation and parole. Now, I do want to just touch on that because I didn't put that in there. As a level 1, 2, or 3 recovery residents, you do have to abide by CFR 42 Part 2. And if you are a level 4 recovery resident, HIPAA also would apply to you all. We can talk about different levels in a little bit because I know there was some confusion with the couple of you all that I met up in Delaware a few months back. Your social media policy. Now, your social media policy could be contained in your confidentiality policy and procedure, or it may be separate. But we want to make sure that we address social media and what can be disclosed and shared. And so that could be separate or it could be one and the same. Now, your social media policy should address the protection of resident information, including images and testimonials. You want to make sure that your policy includes what information you are going to share. You want to make sure that you're capturing residents' consent to share information. Discuss how residents can refuse and or redact their consent to share information, and also include the timeline in which information can be shared. This is another thing that came up while I was in Delaware. However, if you guys do have facilities where you are going to have video or audio surveillance, you do need to include a separate policy for that, or you can include it within your confidentiality policy and procedure as well. And Delaware does have actually a lot of specific laws in regards to video and audio surveillance, specifically in homes such as the ones that you all operate. And so I don't know if is Brian on the call?
I am, Whitney.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So Brian did challenge us with this, and he brought up a really great point. You know, if you're at a Walmart or a hotel, audio and video surveillance, well, at least video surveillance is everywhere, and you have no expectation of privacy when you walk in there. You know that you're being videotaped. And so why would a recovery residence that is a community setting be any different than that? Why would you need to actually capture consent? And it's because it is actually a private place and you do expect privacy in your home. Additionally, Delaware does have 2 extra laws. They are one of 11 states that require reciprocal consent on video and audio surveillance anywhere where you would expect privacy. Now, that doesn't mean you guys can go and obviously put videos and audio surveillance in bathrooms. We still want to keep them in common areas. There's actually been a lot of case law to date regarding whether video and audio surveillance actually improves security in recovery residents, mental health homes, etc., or if it's actually a violation of HIPAA and CFR 42 and confidentiality laws. So bottom line, if you guys are going to be doing video and audio surveillance, you guys do want to capture consent and you want to keep it to common areas. If the video audio is only outside of your home and it's not in an area that is considered private, like it's directly outside facing the street, you would not actually need to capture consent because it is not considered a private place. Moving on to your resident screening policy and procedure, which to me has always been very crucial. If you screen appropriately and you make sure the right people are coming into your home to maintain the culture of your home and maintain or that are fit for the services that you provide and the culture that you provide, your recovery path, everything, then it just makes for an easy transition into the home and success long term for the individual. So we want to make sure that your screening procedure ensures compatibility with your priority population, the recovery path, and the support and services that you provide. And you also want to define the criteria for accepting or excluding any prospective residents from the home. And think about medications, criminal history, mental health, self-harm, just anything that would absolutely exclude someone from being accepted into the home. You want to make sure that you document that in your policy and procedure. And then you also want to just do the minimum criteria for acceptance. Has an SUD, is 18 and above, et cetera, et cetera. Resident orientation policy and procedure. So you want to develop a comprehensive orientation process to familiarize new or returning residents within the recovery residence. You want to make sure that in that process, it's documenting that you provide residents with a handbook containing all the important information and guidelines for their stay. And you don't want to just hand that to them. You want to actually go through an orientation where you sit with the individual and you go over all of their rights and requirements, and you're capturing individual consents to each one of the pages in the handbook, electronically, manually, however you do it. But there needs to be a verbal conversation instead of just throwing a book at them and saying, sign this and get back to us. You want to make sure at this time that we're implementing drug testing and hazardous item searches to maintain a safe and sober living environment. And you want to make sure that's documented in the policy and procedure. And then you want to make sure that this is a social model orientation. So you want to make sure it outlines methods through which the new residents are introduced and acclimated into the home, how they're assigned to their bed, their room, how they're introduced to their storage spaces, both in their rooms, bathrooms, kitchens, walk them around, show them where the emergency exits are, naloxone, introduce them to the residents in the home. How are they introduced to the community at large if they're not familiar with the area, or even this is their first time and they have no idea where a meeting is? So you want to document that process and how you guys orientate the resident. At this time, financial obligations need to be addressed. And so you want to make sure you explain all financial obligations relating to the resident and their family, including any potential costs that may come up. Any forfeiture of deposits or fees, and a timetable for the return of any refunds or credits. And then please note again that the SAR does not take general acknowledgments. So if you have a handbook and at the end of your handbook you capture signature, that is not going to be acceptable. The SAR needs to capture individual consent to each one of the policies and procedures that we're talking about in the resident handbook. That can be done electronically or manually. However, it does need to be individual consent to each page as we're going through each policy with the resident. Now, if you guys do offer any type of hardship, 2 weeks, find a job before you start paying, or any full scholarships, partial scholarships, you do need to document your process in a policy and procedure of how those are awarded and how they're tracked, and any stipulations that would result in a revocation of that hardship and the resident having to terminate based on not meeting the requirements of that scholarship. If you guys never offer those types of benefits, then your policy would be really simple. We do not offer hardship scholarships at this time. Excuse me. Do you want to make sure that you're establishing policies and procedures for assessing for financial hardship and then providing those scholarships to the residents in need? And you want to make sure that you're documenting that assessment process, the contracts that the residents sign for receiving financial assistance, and any terms that go along with that. Compensated resident policy. This is another one that if you guys never provide residents with paid work arrangements whatsoever, you can just simply say, we do not provide paid work arrangements, and that's your policy. However, if there's any situation in which you would offer a resident to do lawn work, to get caught up on rent, or paint a new house, or whatever it is, then you do need to have a policy and procedure regarding those type of work arrangements. And so you would need to write out the agreement outlining the compensation and work expectations for the resident. You want to make sure that the procedure includes informing all qualified residents of the opportunity for paid work, and it's not just a one-off relationship with a selected client of your choice. Establish policies to ensure termination of that employment opportunity or employment agreement does not affect the resident's ability to continue residing in the recovered residence. And establish policies to ensure that recovery comes first, special privileges are not given, and the work is considered fair by a majority of the residents that live in the home. Moving on to good neighbor policy and procedure. You want to ensure that the recovery residence aligns with the surrounding community and maintains good neighbor relations. And you want to have that documented on how you achieve that. Implement policies to address property maintenance, noise control, parking, smoking areas, which should not be in an area that causes attraction, should be in the back of the property or in the side in privacy. Loitering and other considerations for being a good neighbor. You want to make sure that you document your policy and procedure for providing concerned neighbors with the contact information for the responsible person to address the neighbor's concerns, and also go over orientation with the resident on how they should interact with neighbors, and also that if a concerned neighbor approaches them, how do they deal with that situation? Because they should never try to resolve any concerns that neighbors have. They should always just provide the appropriate staff contact information for the neighbor to contact. Hazardous item search policy and procedure. So you want to make sure it includes a complete list of prohibited items and consequences for possessing or using any prohibited items within the recovery residence. And you want to break that down by what happens at the time of admission versus after the resident has already stayed there, because the consequence usually will vary in those different scenarios. You want to establish and document your policies and procedures for conducting searches. What triggers a search? How do you guys go about searches, etc.? Moving on to your emergency plans. First, we want to make sure that we develop comprehensive plan for evacuations, including designating meeting locations and capturing emergency contact information. You want to make sure that in your policy and procedure, it specifically lists the designated meeting location outside of each of your properties. That's something that PSAR will look for in your manuals, and we'll come back to you and ask you to address if it's not clearly listed there. You want to make sure that it includes posting emergency information in visible areas of the recovery residence for quick reference, and so that residents know what to do. Establish protocols for, at minimum, medical emergencies, overdoses, fires, and state-specific natural emergencies. You also want to make sure that your policy, this is a new standard NAR came up with their 3.0 standards. Fire drills, regardless of what level of support you are, you do need to conduct fire drills at least quarterly that involves both staff and residents, and you want to make sure that those fire drills are documented. So you want to need to include that in your emergency policy and procedure. Inc Also a policy and procedure regarding the contacting of emergency contacts or next of kin in the event of a emergency or life-threatening event. And then what is your incident reporting policy and procedure as it relates to reporting to BSAR, which you would need to do in 72 hours of any life-threatening event and or death. And that includes whether that happens on site or off site. If it includes any resident that is under your care at the time, then you need to do an incident report and make sure that BSAR has that. And that form will be available on the BSAR website, I believe, very shortly. Infectious disease policy and procedure. It should outline first what is the definition of infectious disease to your organization. Should include what protective equipment is offered or required of both staff and residents. Should offer behavioral guidance, cleaning guidance, isolation and quarantine protocols, and include waste disposal protocols.